So we'll actually start a few seconds early. I'm delighted to bring you today Judaism, actually Jewish humor for the sages, which I like to think of Jewish humor for the ages with the S around it. I'm delighted to bring Dr. Maurice M. Mizrahi to teach this course. It's a 3-part course. However, each part is independent. So if people have signed up for the 1 session today, that's absolutely fine. Some have signed up for the 2nd session by itself or the 3rd, that's fine too. If you've signed up for the 1st one today and decide you'd like to take a 2nd one, feel free to contact me and I'll help you get registered. So Dr. Mizrahi was born and raised in Egypt, where he was forced to leave at the age of 18 after the Six-Day War in 1967. He earned a PhD in theoretical physics from the University of Texas at Austin and worked in the US Defense Department for 34 years, specializing in science and technology matters, arms control, and defenses against weapons of mass destruction. He has always been fascinated by the interactions between his 2 main loves, science and Judaism. He created and led a monthly discussion group on this subject, which met for 6 years, and he has been scholar in residence on the subject and has been teaching Judaism to teenagers and adults since 1984. From 1988 to 91, he and his eldest son, Michael, have produced, exhibited, and marketed many Judaica computer programs. And by the way, I think the scholar in residence and teaching teens, etc., was with Adat Ra'im, a synagogue. In 2006, he received the Distinguished Civilian Service Award, the highest award available to U.S. civil servants. He lives in Burke, Virginia, and is married to pianist, psychologist Joan Berman Mizrahi, who's joining us today. They have 3 adult children, Michael, Trina, and Jonathan, and 5 grandchildren. And I know they just got back from a visit, so they're very happy to have been with family. He frequently leads services and discussion sessions and gives talks and Torah commentaries, many of them, at his synagogue and elsewhere. Please welcome our distinguished Dr. Maurice Mizrahi to teach us a little bit about some humor.
Thank you, Sherry. Thanks for the introduction. Boy, am I glad this is online. And the reason is that if it was in person, I couldn't have done it because since I came back from my trip, I've been sick and I'm still sick. But something online, just resting in front of my computer, that I can handle with your indulgence. So please bear with me and let's get started. First of all, let me put some boundaries here. This is not a general presentation on Jewish humor. It's just humor in the Tanakh, that is the Jewish Bible, the Talmud, the Midrash, and other ancient Jewish sources. Because yes, they are full of things that are funny. And the compilation I'm going to present to you today is far from exhaustive. Now the Tanakh, the basic Jewish Bible, mentions the word laughter 50 times. The root is tzahak. Now that's the name of Isaac, Yitzhak, because Sarah, his mother, laughed when she was told she would have a baby in her 90s. But when I say that it's mentioned 50 times, I'm excluding the name Isaac because that's a separate matter. But laughter is mentioned all the time. Everybody laughs. God laughs in the Talmud. The Talmud records the teachings of more than 1,000 rabbis spanning 7 centuries, from the 2nd century BCE to the 5th century CE. It's the basis of all Jewish law. And after it was closed in the 5th century, that for 2 centuries, a group called the Savoraim improved the style and made it easier to handle and to study. And frequently in the Talmuds, the rabbis dream up hypothetical situations that are strange, far-fetched, improbable, sometimes even impossible. And they do that to illustrate legal issues, also to entertain, to make the study less boring, and to sharpen the mind with brain teasers. Now, going to extremes always helps to understand difficult concepts and struggle through the logic. I'm a physicist, and someone like Einstein always had thought experiments up his sleeve. A thought experiment is something that you can't realize in practice, but by thinking through what's going on in the thought experiment, you can spot the highlight on the difficulties and try to understand them better. So going to extremes is a Jewish way of understanding things. From the Talmud to Einstein, they both did it. Some commentators say that the humor I'm about to present to you is not intentional. Well, sometimes, maybe, but one cannot avoid the feeling that it is. The reason for the humor is not always clear, I must tell you, but it is there. The Talmud itself says that you should always begin your presentations with a joke. That's a quote from Rabbah in the 4th century CE in the Talmud. This is the quote: before he began his lecture to the scholars, Rabbah used to say something funny, and the scholars were cheered. After that, he sat in awe and began the lecture. Now, if you listen carefully to that quote, it means that there's a time for joking and a time for being serious, and never the twain shall meet. So, two separate things. Laughing and entertaining are important in the Talmud. It says so specifically. I like this particular story from Tractate Ta'anit. Rabbi Beroka Hoza'a often went to the marketplace at Bet Lapat, where the prophet Elijah often appeared to him. Now, you know that the prophet Elijah did not die. He just disappeared in heaven in a fiery chariot, and he reappears sometimes to do some act of charity or to just talk to some people to see what's going on in the world. And he will also come back to announce the arrival of the Messiah. So in this story, this rabbi went to the marketplace, and the prophet Elijah often appeared to him. Once he asked Elijah, is there anyone in this market who has a share in the world to come? Is anyone around us worthy to go into paradise, into heaven, the world to come? Elijah looked around and answered, no. Later, two men passed by, and Elijah remarked, these two have a share in the world to come. Rabbi Beroka then approached these two men and asked them, what is your occupation? They replied, we are jesters. When we see people who are depressed, we cheer them up. Furthermore, when we see two people quarreling, we try hard with humor to make peace between them. Aha, that qualified them for the world to come. In Tractate Sukkah, it says that during Sukkot, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel used to take 8 lighted torches, juggle them, catch one and throw one, and they did not touch one another. Now imagine this famous saintly rabbi juggling 8 lighted torches, being careful not to catch one from the burning side, all at the same time, to entertain his congregation during the holiday of Sukkot. Now, the humor centered around irony, sarcasm, satire, exaggeration, wit, play on words, desire for accuracy, excessive desire for accuracy, funny phrasing, religious fervor, some might term excessive, making up absurd situations to make a point, and frequently besting the Roman emperor in debates, sometimes even besting God himself in discussion. Now, before I actually begin, a word of warning. The Talmud has 2 heavily intertwined parts. The legal part, which is the halakha, and the homiletic part, the light stuff, the folk stories, called the Agadah. Now, when we say Talmud study, we mean only the first one, the legal part, not the second. Nothing wrong with the second. It's there to make it entertaining, make it interesting. But it is not Talmud study. The Midrash commented on this verse in Hosea. It says, those who dwell in his shade will return. They will revive like grain and blossom like a vine. So the Midrash says, They will revive like grain, means through Talmud study, that is halakha, the law. And blossom like a vine means through agadah, study, that is homiletic teachings and stories of the sages. And the teaching was summarized by the Netziv from 19th century Poland. And he comments, grain is the staff of life, and without it, man cannot exist. Just as grain is the primary source of man's nourishment, so too is the study of Talmud, with its instructions regarding the laws of living, man's primary focus. The Agadah, on the other hand, is like wine. It can make man happy, but it must be imbibed in proportion. And it is destructive if it is a man's sole source of nourishment. One who engages primarily in Agadah risks misunderstanding and misrepresenting the teachings of our sages, for his life and view of the world are not thoroughly rooted in the firm grounds of the Talmud. So, the light stuff we're about to engage in is not enough and can't be called studying Talmud. It's like the wine that accompanies a meal. It's there to make it lighter, more enjoyable, but by itself, it's not nourishing. Yes. Okay. Having said all this, let's begin in the Tanakh, in the Bible itself, in the book of Genesis. I'll try to make this chronological. So, in the book of Genesis, Sarai, Abram's wife, can conceive. She's getting up in years and she can conceive. So at one point she tells her husband, Avram, quotes from the Torah, "My lords, I beg you, go into my maid Hagar. Perhaps I can obtain children through her." And Avram listened to the voice of Sarai, unquote. So Hagar gets pregnant and quickly becomes very impertinent and disrespectful towards her mistress Sarai. So a very angry Sarai goes to her husband Avram and tells him, quote, "This is all your fault." Now, how exactly was that Abram's fault? She told him to do it? Never mind. So we're still the same people. We haven't changed in all these centuries. Another one involving Sarah. God tells Sarah when God sends the three angels, the messengers, to inform Sarah that she's going to have a child, quote, "And Sarah laughed, saying, 'Shall I have pleasure when I'm old? My husband is also old.' And the Lord said to Abraham, who did not hear Sarah, 'Why did Sarah laugh, saying, "Shall I bear a child when I am old?"' Unquote. So you notice that God does not report exactly what Sarah said for Shalom Bayit, to keep peace in the family. She said, "Will I have a child when my husband is so old?" Then God reports that by saying, "Shall I bear a child when I am so old?" To keep peace in the family. Based on this, the Talmud says it's okay to tell a white lie. Quote, "The school of Ishmael taught, peace is a precious thing. For even the Holy One, blessed be He, changed what was said for its sake." Now, as a footnote, after Sarah dies, Abraham marries Keturah and has 6 more sons, just to make clear that he can still do it. Then we are treated to Middle Eastern negotiations. Abraham bargains with God for Sodom and Gomorrah. God decides to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, but Abraham says, "Well, maybe let's think about it." Quotes, "And Abraham drew near and said, 'Will you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Perhaps there are only 50 righteous inside the city. Will you also destroy and not spare the place for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far from you to do so, to slay the wicked with the righteous, and that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right?'" Note the diplomatic approach. And the Lord said, "If I find in Sodom 50 righteous, I will spare the whole place for their sakes." And Abraham answered and said, "Behold now, I have taken upon me to speak to the Lord. I who am but dust and ashes, perhaps there shall lack 5 of the 50 righteous. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? And God said, if I find 45 there that who are righteous, I will not destroy it. And Abraham spoke to God again and said, perhaps 40 shall be found there. And God said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. And he said to him, oh, let the Lord not be angry with me, and I will speak one more time. Perhaps 30 should be found there. And God said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And Abraham said, behold now, I have taken upon me to speak to the Lord. Perhaps 20 will be found there. And God said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. And Abraham said, oh, let the Lord not be angry, and I will speak just one more time. Possibly 10 shall be found there. And God said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. And the Lord went his way, and as soon as he had finished talking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place, unquote. So you see a very clear Middle Eastern style negotiation, this time between Abraham and God. And then the same Abraham, a little later, has to undergo another Middle Eastern style negotiation when his wife Sarah dies and he looks for a place to bury her. He offers to buy a cave from a man named Ephron. Ephron says, and I quote, no, my Lord, listen to me. I am giving the field to you, and the cave that is in it, I have given it to you as well. In the view of all my countrymen, I have given it to you. Bury your dead. Abraham insists on paying. If only you would listen to me, I'm giving you the money for the fields. And Ephron says, my Lord, hear me. A piece of land worth 40 silver shekels. What is that between me and you? Bury your dead in it. Abraham gets it and pays Ephron that outrageous price. We know that's an outrageous price because of other purchases done in the Bible that show that this was far and above the norm. But that was the Middle East style negotiation. I'll give it to you for free. No, I insist on paying. Okay, 400. So it's still that way today. I come from the Middle East. Everything is done by negotiations, give and take, and saying something that's not on your minds. Moving on, if you have any question, by the way, at any time or any comments, just raise your hands. So Shechem has an affair with Dinah, one of Jacob's daughters, or his daughter that's mentioned in the Bible, and then sends his father to ask her father for her hand in marriage, thinking that by so doing, in Shechem's thinking, and I'm quoting from Genesis, their livestock, their possessions, and all their animals will be ours. So he is being very deceitful. He wants to marry her so he can inherit what she has. Jacob agrees, provided all the males in the tribe are circumcised. And the deal is struck. Shechem then orders all the male in his town circumcised. The Midrash says, and I quote, there was one particular individual, Magbai, who after being told, come and be circumcised like everybody else, retorted, let me get this straight. Shechem is getting married and I have to get circumcised? Explain that to me. Okay, this is very clearly presented in a sarcastic tone. Now here I'm going to ask you a question. There's a deep famine in the land of Israel. So Jacob sends his sons to Egypt to buy food and tells them to bring gifts to the ruler of Egypt, who unbeknownst to him is his own son Joseph, who he thinks is dead. So he tells his sons, quote, if it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. A little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds, unquote. Anything strange about this paragraph? Yes?
Do they have almonds? It's a famine.
Exactly. It's a famine. And they're bringing the ruler of Egypt gifts of foods, fancy foods. Now you would expect the gifts of precious metals or precious stones or fine silks or ornate weapons, but not food. Now it's not explained in the Torah, but I guess food must have been important even in times of famine as a gift. Okay, now we're going to go to the Talmud's commenting on the episode of the burning bush. In the Torah, it says, "And Moses said to God at the burning bush, Behold, when I come to the people of Israel and shall say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, they shall say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am what I am. And he said, so shall you say to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you, unquote." The Talmud says, why was I am what I am shortened to just I am? I am what I am means that the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, go and say to Israel, I am with you in this servitude of yours, and I shall be with you in the servitude of the future, in the kingdoms of Babylon and Rome. Moses said to God, Lord of the universe, they have enough trouble now. No need to tell them about future troubles. The Holy One, blessed be he, agreed and said to Moses, go and tell them just I am has sent me to you. So God agreed to shorten his name so as not to imply that the Jews now being slaves in Egypt will have other reasons to be unhappy in the future. So you probably know this one. After the Jews are freed from Egypt, the armies of Pharaoh pursue them, and the Israelites see Pharaoh's army closing in on them from behind, and before them the sea. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place, Pharaoh's armies and the sea. So they tell Moses, is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you took us out away to die in the wilderness? Again, Jewish sarcasm. Not enough graves, so I'd better take them out in the desert to die there. And then they while Moses is up on Mount Sinai getting the Torah from God, the people get scared and say, wait a minute, Moses is gone. We have nobody to protect us. Let's make a golden calf. So they went to Aaron, Moses' brother, and asked him, could you make us a golden calf? And Aaron obliges. So an angry Moses comes back and confronts his brother Aaron. Aaron replies, they gave me their gold and I just threw it in the fire and out came this calf. In other words, hey, I had nothing to do with it. I just threw it in the fire and out came this calf. Okay, it's this belongs in the category, the dog ate my homework. Now, after Israel complains nonstop on their 40-day voyage in the desert, Moses and God both begin to lose patience in the Jewish people. And God said, okay, I have enough. After the golden calf and all their complaining, I'm going to get rid of them. And Moses, who was supposed to be slow of tongue, argues mightily before the Lord on behalf of Israel. He uses a remarkable series of 10 arguments to influence God. First of all, don't destroy your possession, Israel. If you destroy them, it's your loss. Remember, they're yours. You don't want to throw away something that's yours. You have a plan, God. Don't abandon your plan. You worked hard to get them out of Egypt to fulfill your plan. Are you going to let it all go to waste? Don't you want your plan to come to fruition? So, First, he's trying to use God's sides. What is God's interest in the matter? He tells God, watch for your own interest here. Then he says, notice that not all Israel worshiped the golden calf. Only some did. And it was a minority. You should not destroy all of them for what a minority did. Then he tells them, don't be angry just because Israel wanted to make your job easier. They wanted to make God's job easier by building a golden calf. What does that mean? The Midrash explains, and I quote, when Israel committed that act, Moses arose to appease God and said, Lord of the universe, the Israelites have given you an assistant and you're annoyed with them? Why, this calf which they have made will be your assistant. You will cause the sun to rise and you cause the moon to rise. You will look after the stars and it will see to the constellations. You will cause the dew to descend and it will cause the winds to blow. You will make the rains come down while it will be responsible for the growth of plants. In other words, the golden calf will just assist you, that's all, and the people just wanted to make your job easier. God said to them, Moses, you err as they do, for there is nothing real in it. Moses replied, if there is nothing real in it, why are you angry with your people? Okay, now it goes even further. Moses tells God, I absolve you of your vow. What does that mean? The Midrash says, quote, Moses absolved his creator of his vow. When Israel made the calf, Moses began to persuade God to forgive them. But God said, Moses, I have already taken an oath. Anybody who sacrifices to the God shall be destroyed. That's a quote from Exodus. And I cannot retract an oath which has proceeded from my mouth. So when God has decided something on oath, he has to keep his words. That's what he's telling Moses. Moses said, Master of the universe, did you not grant me the power to annul oaths? If a jurist wants others to respect the law, he must be the first to observe it himself. Since you have commanded me concerning the annulment of vows, it's only right and proper that you should follow this procedure yourself. Whereupon Moses wrapped himself in his talit and seated himself in the posture of a rabbinical judge. And God stood before him as one asking for the annulment of a vow. What did Moses say to him? A most difficult thing. Rabbi Yochanan said the difficult thing was, do you now regret your vow? God replied, I regret now the evil which I said I would do to my people. When Moses heard this, he proclaimed, be it absolved for you, be it absolved for you. There is neither vow nor oath any longer. So that's going pretty far. Moses is sitting in judgment of God, absolving him of his vow to destroy the Jewish people. Then, another point in God's benefit. Moses says, you have to worry about your image, God. What will the Egyptians say? Do you really want them to laugh at you when your plan comes to nothing? This would diminish your stature in their eyes. You better not do this. Another one. Moses tells God, keep your promises. You promised the patriarchs they will have descendants and lands. If you destroy all the Jews now, that won't happen. Does your promise count for nothing? And then Moses gets really ferocious at that point. He tells God, you yourself caused Israel to sin. The Talmud explains, how did God himself cause Israel to sin with the golden calf? This is what the Talmud says in Tractate Berachot. They said in the school of Rabbi Yanai, thus spoke Moses before the Holy One, blessed be he. Sovereign of the universe, the silver and gold that you showered on Israel was what led them to make the calf. Rabbi Hiya Bar Abba said, it's like the case of a man who had a son. He bathed him and anointed him and gave him plenty to eat and drink and hung a purse around his neck and set him down at the door of a brothel. How could the boy help sinning? So Moses is accusing God of having pushed the people into sinning by giving them everything they needed, the gold, the silver, providing all their needs and all that. He said it's inevitable that they would do that. And Moses then resorts to co-option. He says, I'm angry too. The Midrash explains. What did Moses do? He went up to God and said, this people has sinned a great sin. When God saw that, he said to him, Moses, you too are angry with them? We cannot both be angry. When you see me pour hot water, you pour cold. When you see me pour cold, you pour hot. So Moses is telling God, yes, I agree. They did a terrible thing. They shouldn't have done that. I'm mad at them myself. I'm angry, angry, angry. And God said, wait a minute now. I'm very angry too. We can't both be angry. We have to play good cop, bad cop. And so Moses is co-opting by pretending to be just as angry as God is. And then at the end, his last argument, there are 10 arguments total. In his last arguments, Moses tells God, if you don't forgive them, I quit. Don't take me for granted. Pull my name out of the Torah. I don't want to be associated with failure. So he tells God, just kill me too. And, I don't want any part of this. And in the end, it worked. God not only did not destroy Israel, but he restored them to chosen status, and they were friends again. So all we can say about Moses is, for a man who was slow of tongue, he was a masterful lawyer. Let me pause here and ask you if you have any questions or comments. Anybody? Hope I'm not boring you with all these jokes.
Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the last story you told, where is that found? This arguing between God and Moses about,
Well, the basic story is in the Torah.
Yeah, that I know.
Okay, the one about Moses co-opting?
Yeah.
That's in Yalkut Shimoni. It's a midrash, Yalkut Shimoni. That particular story is there.
Okay, I never heard that sort of extensive interchange between.
Yeah.
Okay, it really goes on for a long time.
In the Midrash and Talmud, they really have it. The wit, the sarcasm, the exchanges, the sharp jabs back and forth.
But who actually believes that story? Is that widely believed, or only a few people?
Well, okay. When something is in the Midrash or in the Agadic part of the Talmud, it means one of two things. Either it's a fact, it's presented as a tradition that is transmitted from one generation to the next as factual, or it's a parable, it's a story, it's a made-up story that's designed to teach us a lesson. If you can find the lesson, then you know it's a parable. If you cannot find the lesson, then it's intended as factual. The lesson in all that is that it's okay to argue with God the way Moses did, to argue your case. In the book of Job, there is a line that's very often quoted. Job says to his wife, yea, though he slay me, still will I trust in him. That's the line that's often quoted. But the full line is never quoted. The full line from the book of Job is, yea, though he slay me, still will I trust in him, but I will argue my case before him. That part is very important and very Jewish. That's exactly what Moses is doing here. And so the idea is, yes, argue all you want, shake your not floor mat worshippers. That lesson is presented in spades in the Talmud and the Midrash.
Is that why so many Jews became lawyers?
Lawyers? I suppose so.
Okay.
These arguments are quite sharp and clever.
Yeah.
So let's.
Yeah, but you'll have to explain why so many Jews became doctors. Where was that in your midrash? I think it equals lawyers at least.
Right, right. Now the doctor part is the,
Maurice,
yes? I'm
I
listening.
don't want to interrupt you, but there was a comment from Sue Keidelman. I don't know if you wanted to mention that. Did you see it about guilt? That guilt is something that's, Jewish guilt has come from biblical times. We even see it back then.
Absolutely. You can see it in the quotes I gave you. Very clear. Okay, let's go on. Let's march on the Tanakh. In the Tanakh, Moses, or rather God's, after hearing all the complaints from the Jews that they wanted meat, they were tired of manna, they wanted meat. So God promises meat for a whole month. Okay? Now, the Torah says, quotes, and Moses said, there are 600,000 of us, and you say, I will give them meat that they may eat the whole month. Will it be enough if we slaughter all the flocks and all the herds? Will it be enough if all the fish of the sea are offered to them? And the Lord said to Moses, is there anything the Lord cannot do? You will see now whether my word shall come to pass to you or not. In other words, when Moses tells God, this one may be too big even for you, God said, oh yeah, you just watch. Okay, and then Korah rebels. There's an open rebellion in the deserts. Korah rounds up a number of rebels and says, okay, we're going to depose Moses and go back to Egypt. So Moses summons the rebel leaders for a little talk. And they reply, Lo na'ale, we will not go up. They won't go to meet Moses. And they were right. Later, the earth opened up and they were swallowed, going straight down. So when they said we will not go up, they were speaking prophetically. They went down in the end. That's also in the Midrash. Now we're going to leave the Torah proper and go into the books of Samuel and Kings. So, the people want a king. God tells them it's a bad idea. The prophet Samuel tells them it's a bad idea. But the people said, we want a king just like all the other people around us. All the bad aspect of a kingdom are explained to them, but they said, no, we want it. So finally, God tells the prophet Samuel, okay, give them a king, and it'll be on their heads. So he summons Saul to Jerusalem to be anointed king of Israel. Young King Saul arrives on his white horse to Jerusalem, and he sees some young maidens by a water well. And he asks the maidens, is the prophet Samuel here? This is what the girls answer him, straight from the Bible. Quote, he is. Behold, he is before you. Make haste now, for he came today to the city. For there is a sacrifice of the people today in the high place. As soon as you come to the city, you shall find him, before he goes up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat until he comes, because he blesses the sacrifice. And afterwards, those who are invited eat. So therefore go up, about this time you shall find him. Unquote. That's in the Bible. The Talmud asks, why did the girls make such a long story of it? 3 rabbis give answers. The first one is because women are fond of talking. Quoting the Talmud, 10 measures of speech descended on earth. The women took 9 and the men took 1. Answer number 1. Answer number 2, the Bible said about King Saul, there was not among the people of Israel a more handsome man than Saul. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. So the girls wanted to feast their eyes on Saul. And so they kept talking just to keep him there as long as possible, so they can feast on his good looks. And then there is a serious, no nonsense answer from a third rabbi. He said, because God decided that Saul was not meant to be king until a certain precise moment. And so God made the girl delay him until that moment. Okay, that's not my favorite answer, but anyway. So, there you have it. So Saul fails and starts harassing his probable successor, David. So David goes out of town to escape Saul's wrath, and he is brought before King Achish of a nearby kingdom. And to avoid giving a hint as to who he really is, he pretends to be insane. King Achish tells his servants, "Why did you bring this guy to me? Does it look like I don't have enough lunatics in my kingdom that you have brought this one to carry on in my presence?" The phrasing is funny. Now this one also is funny. King David becomes king, stays king for 40 years, writes the Psalms, does a lot of beautiful things to maintain the kingdom and get the people to be observant and study and follow the Torah. And then he gets old. And the Tanakh says in the book of Kings, quotes, "And King David was old and advanced in years. They covered him with blankets, but he could not become warm. So his servant said to him, 'Let there be sought for you a young virgin, and let her stand before you and be your attendant, and let her lie in your bosom, that you may become warm.' And they looked for a pretty girl throughout all the territory of Israel, and found Abishag, a Shunammite, and brought her to the king. And the girl was very pretty, and she attended the king and ministered to him, but the king knew her not. He did not have sexual relations with her." Okay. The Talmud adds in Tractates and Hedrin, quote, "Abishag said to King David, 'Let's get married.' But King David said, 'You are forbidden to me, because I already have the maximum number of wives, 18. She teased him. When courage fails the thief, he becomes virtuous. In other words, you can't do it anymore. Then King David said to his servants, 'Bring me my wife Bathsheba.' Rav Yehuda said in Rav's name, 'On that occasion, Bathsheba dried herself 13 times. So King David had intercourse with his wife Bathsheba 13 times in a row to show Abishag that he still could. That's what the Talmud tells us. Still in the book of Kings, there's the unending battle between the idolaters and the believers. Elijah in particular was fiercely going against the almost lost his life, going against the prophets of Baal. Baal was the rival deity, widely worshipped in the land of Israel. And Elijah went and confronted them. And Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Call on the name of your gods." And they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, "Oh Baal, hear us." But there was no sound, no response. And it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked the prophets of Baal and said, "Shout louder, because he's a god. Maybe he's deep in thought, or maybe he's relieving himself in the bathroom, or maybe he's on a trip, or maybe he's sleeping and you can wake him." In other words, total sarcasm and ridiculing the idols in front of those who believe in them. Okay, now this essentially completes the parts about the Bible. Now we're going to go into the Talmud and Midrash proper, not necessarily commenting on the Bible directly, but doing so indirectly. One last thing from the book of Proverbs, one of my favorite quotes from the book of Proverbs is this: if you rise up very early in the morning and wake up your friends with a wonderful blessing, your friend will consider it to be worse than receiving a curse. In other words, no one likes to be awakened in the morning from deep sleep, even if it's by somebody smiling and giving you a blessing. That's the wisdom of the book of Proverbs. Okay, before I go into the next section, any questions or comments?
Maurice, when you were talking about the different things that I'm like losing my train of thought. I don't know why, but where you were saying all those comments about Elijah, where is that found? Where Baal and Elijah? I think it was Elijah. In Proverbs? Prophets?
No, it's in the Torah. It's in the Tanakh itself. It's in the book of Kings.
Kings. It's in Kings.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, what Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, and
Yeah.
maybe
Okay.
maybe your deity is relieving himself in the bathroom. Yeah, that's directly from the Bible.
Like he literally says that?
That's what the Bible says. It's quoting him. It's not paraphrasing. It's quoting him directly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That's Jewish sarcasm.
Certainly.
Other comments, questions? Okay. Now, in the Talmuds, the rabbis thought it was extremely important to give proper attribution to any teaching that they convey. So, the Talmud says twice, when you report a saying in the name of its author, you bring deliverance to the world. In two places. So that's very important. This leads to some interesting passages in the Talmud. I once went into a competition with my son to see who can produce the most layers of attribution. And then for a few years, I was the one who was winning because I found 5 levels of attribution. But then he came up with a passage that probably wins the contest hands down, that had 8 levels of attribution. And here it is. Tractate Nedarim. Rabbi Shimon ben Zebid said in the name of Rabbi Yitzhak ben Tabla, who said it in the name of Rabbi Achia HaReka, who belonged to the school of Rabbi Aha, who said it in the name of Rabbi Zera, who said it in the name of Rabbi Elazar, who said it in the name of Rabbi Hananiah, who said it in the name of Rabbi Measha, on the authority of Rabbi Yehuda ben Eli. And then a short sentence. Now that's being extremely scrupulous in making sure you give proper attribution. But they thought that was important, and so they did it. Now the Talmuds always reports the decisions of the Sanhedrin, which are always done by majority votes. And the practice is to cite and credit minority opinions first, and then conclude with the majority opinion, which is binding. So they would say, Rabbi X said that, Rabbi Y said that, Rabbi Z said that, but the sages said, and then the decision of the majority. So I always thought it was funny that the majority opinion is always introduced with V'chachamim omrim, but the sages said. It makes it look like all the minority rabbis are not sages. Of course they are, but the way it's presented, Rabbi X said this, Rabbi Y said this, Rabbi Y said this, but the sages said, and the decision makes it look like the minority people are not sages. 178 times in the Talmud and Midrash it says that, but the sages said, and the decision. Another line of humor is exaggerated accuracy or exaggerated desire for accuracy. For example, in Tractate Bava Metzia, in a famous episode which we'll talk about in some detail later, Rabbi Eliezer brought forward every imaginable argument to convince his colleagues, but they did not accept them. He said to them, if the halacha agrees with me, let this carob tree prove it. And then a miracle, the carob tree uprooted itself and moved 100 cubits out of its place. Others say 400 cubits. So there's an uncertainty as to how far the carob tree moved, as if we cared about that uncertainty. I mean, that's not the point at all, but they had to make sure. Another one, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi observed, suffering is precious. He suffered for 13 years, 6 because of kidney stones and 7 because of scurvies. But others say it was 6 because of scurvy and 7 because of kidney stones. Now, that point of detail is totally irrelevant to the story, but they had to make sure that if there was a dissenting voice, it would be recorded. I like to cite the rest of the story because it shows that love and compassion are very much present and active in the Talmud. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, whom we just quoted, was the rabbi of the Mishnah, the one who compiled the Mishnah, the oral law, and he was by far the greatest rabbi of his generation. Why did he suffer for 13 years? The Talmud in Bava Metzia says, his sufferings came to him through a certain incident and departed likewise. They came to him through a certain incident. What is it? A calf was being taken to the slaughter. It broke away, hit his head on the rabbi's skirts, and wailed in terror. Go, said he, you were created for this. Thereupon they said in heaven, since he has no pity, let us bring suffering upon him. So a little calf who's about to be led to the slaughter is running to the rabbi and hiding himself under his robes because he's scared. And the rabbi tells him, go, you were created for this slaughter. Now, even though the calf doesn't understand him, this is a very callous thing to say. And so when they heard him in heaven, they said, since he has no pity, let's bring suffering upon him. And departed likewise. How so? The Talmud says. One day, the rabbi's maid was sweeping the house. Seeing some young weasels lying there, she began to sweep them away. He said to her, leave them be. It is written, and his mercies are all over his works. V'rachamav al kol ma'asav. They said in heaven, since now he is compassionate, let us be compassionate to him. And his suffering ceased, because he was compassionate to the weasels and told his maids to just leave them alone. So I thought this was an interesting story to show. Love and compassion are very much present in the Talmud. It's not just dry legal stuff. Now, with your permission, I'd like to pause here because I don't think I can continue much in my condition. But I'm very happy to hear from you. If you have a question, I can answer it briefly.
Does anyone have any comments or questions that they'd like to pose? Looks like Sue. Okay.
Maurice, when I was listening to you and they were talking about the jealousy and the guilt, also, is it because us Jews, I was once told in a seminar that I went to that I was the only person that wasn't afraid to ask questions if I didn't understand something or if it didn't make sense to me. Does that also come representative from Jews, that we are more curious than, say, other people?
Absolutely. It says in the Talmud, a student must never say, I understand, if he doesn't understand. He must always keep asking questions. And the teacher has the duty to repeat it to him and until he understands and has all his questions answered. That's written very plainly in the Talmud. There are no stupid questions.
And also Judaism wants you to question, even I guess beyond that.
Absolutely.
That's why so many rabbis, I guess, mull over all these things where they come up with different ideas and answers till they can get a consensus or
Yeah.
majority.
One subject for discussion is the reasons behind the commandments, which are not given in the Torah. Some people say, don't worry about the reason, just follow the commandments. But the Talmud says, Rabbi Akiva said, no, it's a mitzvah to look for the commandments, to look for the reasons behind the commandments, to speculate on them. Because if you find something that satisfies you, you'll be even more eager to follow the commandment. But no matter what you find at the end, you have to follow the commandment. But seeking a reason in your mind that satisfies you is a mitzvah, and it's something you have to do.
Good point.
Anybody else?
Sue Keidelman said, I always wonder in the Talmud how it is known who said what who said. Did I say that right, Sue? How it is known who said what who said. Yeah, I guess how to figure it all out.
Yeah, when the Sanhedrin met in the chamber of hewn stones, they had recorders, they had stenographers who took down what was going on. And that's how they recorded the decisions, recorded the whole process of looking for an answer, what each rabbi said and so forth. And the Talmud later summarized it in 64 hefty tomes, if you can call that summarized. 7 centuries of discussions are there, preserved for us.
Okay. She also thought that they were going back historically. Did they know historically beyond that who said what? Or were they making some educated guesses?
Well, you know what the Jewish tradition is. On Mount Sinai, God gave Moses the written Torah, and he also gave him the oral law, which was later written down in the Mishnah, with instructions not to write it down. And that is the way of interpreting the words of the Torah, because no codes can foresee every possible circumstance or every possible way of interpreting things. And so, but when the Roman persecution became severe and the rabbis were being slaughtered, they felt that if they didn't write it down, they would lose it. And so in the 2nd century, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, whom I quoted earlier, the man who had 13 years of suffering, he wrote it down. And then the rest of the Talmud, the Gemara, is a commentary on that oral law and elaborates on it and clarifies certain points. And after that, you have commentaries and commentaries on commentaries and so forth up to the present day. So, but all the things that are said, as I mentioned earlier, are either meant to be factual, things transmitted from one generation to the next as facts, or they're parables that are meant to teach us a lesson. Sometimes the lesson is obvious. It could be both. It could be both, but it's certainly at least one of them. Or the story would not be in the sources.
Carol?
Yeah, let me unmute. Yeah, I was having trouble finding the hand raising me. I've been for some years now taking with Mishnah class weekly with our rabbi up the street at Olam Tikva, Rabbi Calendar, and it is amazing to me that every parsha, every Mishnah that we do has different rabbis with totally different opinions, and so it just goes, and they were recorded at the time. It's like hardly ever do people agree with each other, and they're all learned rabbis and learned scholars, and they're almost never agreeing. In fact, they were notoriously true that never agreed with each other. I think there were actually at the time of Jesus that were in Jerusalem, and they never agreed with each other. It was I'm blanking on their names. It's really interesting to see way back then how people were said and they're not afraid to voice their opinions.
I've always heard that joke, speaking of humor, 2 Jews, 3 opinions.
Right.
So I think
I
that's
was
where
going to
that comes
say
from.
the same thing, that we're not afraid to voice our own opinion, even if we disagree with everybody in the room. And I think that's what makes it so interesting, that we all can think, if we disagree with somebody and they bring up a point, even though we might disagree with it, it makes us think about it and maybe question why, and do some research. At least that's with me, that if I disagree with somebody, but yet the answer or something feels like maybe it's right, makes me want to explore more.
Mhm. And it's interesting, Sherry, in looking at Tevye back that when you said there's two people, or three different opinions. There's that scene in the Fiddler on the Roof where he's talking to somebody saying something, and Tevye says, you're right. And then another guy says something different, and Tevye says, you're right. And the third guy says, Tevye, they can't all be right, both be right. And Tevye goes, and you're right too. So.
Yeah. Although they could be right if they're all different facts, but in any case, it makes for interesting discussion and research, and I think it makes you think, period. So I want to thank Maurice for being here. I did not realize you were under the weather, so I'm so glad we did schedule this, first of all, as Zoom instead of in person, and second of all, that you were able to participate and present and entertain us today. And I hope you'll feel better come a week from today.
Thank you.
God willing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
See you all next week.
Everybody, thanks for joining. And except for Paul, I think everyone on this call is going to be here for the next two sessions. So we look forward to continuing the humor and the sages in the Torah and the Talmud. And Maurice, I'm trying to keep track of where you're going, but it sounds like we could go all over the place to find the humor. So keep letting us know what parts to read up on. Have a good day. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you, Maurice, and feel
Yeah.
better.
Feel better.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Bye-bye.